learners, welcome to the lecture series of Advanced Java. My topic for today is URL and URL connection classes, and we will be learning about all these in details. URL class and URL connection class. Okay, so without wasting any time, let us start. Okay, now URL is a class. It is an inbuilt class which resides in java.net package, and you can import it using java.net.url. Okay, now you already know what is the full form of URL. It is Uniform Resource Locator, and it is nothing but highlighting the various parts of a URL. Okay, so let's look at the bifurcation in detail. The bifurcation is, as you can see, I've given an example of a URL inside, that is http example.com. Okay, so here in the URL we can bifurcate and we can easily derive the protocol, that is HTTP, the domain name or the host name, that is example.com, the port number which is explicitly set, that is 80, and the path to the file or a file, that is path to my file.html, and various other parameters that we are passing on to this page. Okay, so here you can see in the URL I have explicitly written 80, which is a port number. That is a port number which I am setting. If I do not set this 80, then the port number is by default HTTP's port number, that is also 80. Okay, but if I'm using HTTPS and I'm setting this port 80 explicitly, then port number returned is 80 and not HTTP's port number. Okay, now this URL can help you access all these parameters using various methods which are available in this inbuilt class. We shall now move on to URL connection. Now this URL connection can be established after you know what URL you want to connect to. So after you have a specific URL, with using this URL connection class, you can make access of all the attributes of the content that you are accessing. But this is possible only after making a connection. You can find out what is the content that is displayed on that particular URL, what is the type of content, what is the length of the content. You can find out expiration dates and whatnot. So if you want to explore more about the content that is there in the URL that you are firing, then URL connection class helps you to do that. Okay, so let's move on and practically look at what the URL and the URL connection class has to give you. Welcome students to the URL demo session. In this practical session, we are going to learn about the URL class, which is an inbuilt class in java.net package. We shall see how this class is helpful to bifurcate the various parts that we have already studied previously in the presentation, the various parts of the URL, and how we are bifurcating them, how we can set them using this class, and how we can get those bifurcated parameters through this class. So let's begin. Now this is my class. This is the main method. The main method will throws exception so that we do not have to explicitly write it in try catch block. Now I want to create a URL object or an object of the URL class. So I cannot directly create it without importing the java.net.url package. Okay, so I have imported the java.net package, and I can now use the URL class which is present inside. So I can easily create an object of the URL class, and I'm using its first constructor, that is having only a string parameter. It is returning nothing. Okay, it's a constructor. So here we can give the name of a string. Okay, so let's just name that string. This is my URL. Let's just take it as a URL. Okay, now as you can see, this is my link, and these are the parameters that I'm going to pass. Okay, So now let us see the various or explore the various methods. So first let us explore plus URL dot get class. It is going to give me the name of the class that is being used. Okay, so let us run the program and see. This URL is an object of the URL class. Okay, so here we are getting an output. It is in java.net.url. So the name of the class is URL. So this is a variable, this is an object of the URL class. Okay, next is out. Let us get the port number. Okay, so let us print the port. Port is -1. The reason being -1 is it returns -1 if your port is not explicitly set. Okay, so in this URL I am not setting my port anywhere in the URL, so it will return -1. Okay, now let us check what the default port is. What is the default port? Let us check. URL.get default port. Okay, now default port is going to return the port of the HTTPS. Okay, so HTTPS protocol we are using. So by default the port that is used is 443. Okay, which is a secure protocol. If I change it to HTTP, I'm going to get 80 as a result. Okay, so whatever default port is used is decided by the protocol that you are using, and if you are explicitly setting the port anywhere else, then your get port will not return -1 but it will return something else. Okay, now let's check URL.getFile. Okay, let us print file. Now your file is all the content after this that comes under your file. Okay, so all this is your file part. Next is let us check the host. Get host. Okay, this is my host. My host is this part. Okay, next let us check get protocol. Get protocol HTTPS, right? Okay, now we will see another constructor of the same URL class. URL1 is equal to new URL, and here we will see 4 parameters that we can pass. That is this one. First is the protocol, then the host, then the port, and then the file. So all these things are the things that we can directly set. Okay, so we are going to use this one. For that you need to define in form of string. So let us take protocol first. Okay, protocol we will take as HTTPS. Next we will take string. Let us take host. Okay, host we will take as google1.com. Okay, you can name anything, it is not necessary. Okay, next is your port number. Okay, don't set, so sorry. Next is your port number, so that will be in integer. Port we can set to this, and next you have your file or your path, that is also in string. Okay, we will name it as hello world parameters. Okay, let us name it as hello world parameters. Okay, so we can give these things here in the URL itself. We are using this constructor. We have set the parameters, and now we can use all these here. Okay, so I'm checking the class of URL1. I'm checking the port of URL1. I'm checking the default port. I'm checking the file, I'm checking the host, and I'm checking the protocol. Okay, so let's run this program and see. As you can see here, this I forgot to enter the variable port here. Okay, this port I was setting here. Okay, so this file I'm setting here, this host I'm setting here, and this protocol I'm setting here. And let me just get this clear differentiation. Okay, so as you can see, the class of URL1 is URL. Okay, then I have already set the port through this URL. So get port is not returning -1, it is returning 4 times 2. Okay, then default port is 443 because I'm using the protocol HTTPS, so default is 443. Now my file is, the file that I have set is this. Okay, host is google1.com and protocol is HTTPS. So that's all for URL. Now we shall look on to the URL connection class. The URL connection class is a type of class which helps you to get the information about whatever content is there in the specific URL that you have opened. So we shall now explore the various methods of the URL connection class, and this can happen only after you have opened a connection using a URL class. Okay, so we'll move further with the program. If you want to use the URL connection class, you need to import java.net.urlconnection class. Okay, so I've imported the class now. I will be able to use it freely now. I already have a URL. The URL is w3schools.com. Okay, and this is what I have explored: the class, the port, the files, okay, the default port, and the protocols host. Okay, now the URL is available. We shall now check and open a connection with this URL. So let us create an object of the URL connection class, that is URLCon is equal to URL.openConnection. Now what will happen when you fire this statement? This URL connection is going to store or open a connection with this URL. So now I am opening the contents of this W3 schools here directly using open connection method. Okay, now using this URLCon, I will be able to access all the information of the contents of this page. Okay, so sout I can check URLCon dot get content. Okay, so that is going to return an object, and we can get it in form of the content, right? Okay, this is the content of my file. It's in form of an object, so it is printing an object. Okay, next is we will get the expiration time. Plus URLCon dot get expiration. Okay, now this is a date. It's going on to the internet, so it's taking some time. It's reading the content. Okay, let's just comment it so that it doesn't have to read the content every time. This date is returning in form of long, so what you can do is you can just write new date class, and for date class let us just store it in a variable. What we can do is we can store it in a variable, say long date of expiry, which is URLCon dot get expiration. Okay, and when we are printing this, plus date expiration, you will get it in long. Okay, now if I don't want to get it in long, then what I'm supposed to do is I can convert to new date class, and inside date class I can give date expiry variable, so it will get converted. But this date class is in java dot util dot star. Okay, so now you can get the date that you want. The content is expiring on, you can get. Okay, so you can say this is the expiry date. Next is we will get the content type. Okay, how we will get the content type? By URL con dot get content type. Okay, and finally it is text slash HTML. We can get content length. Okay, content length. Okay, this is the content length. Fine. That's all for URL connection. Thank you.